And the topic I want to cover today, and you had mentioned, you've did some research on this as well,
Hmm.
is in my opinion, it's one of the most consequential events in the 20th century. And no one ever really talks about this. You have to like read, you're not taught this in school for some odd reason. Like even
Hmm.
in like AP history class, you're not even like advanced high school history classes, it doesn't really touch on this topic. And I think this is like one of the events that sets the precedent for how governments act towards human populations or ethnic groups
Hmm.
over the following decades,
Yep.
which, go into the Second World War, where humans were treated very poorly by governments.
Yep.
And this was the event known as it was a population exchange between Greece and Turkey in 1923.
Yeah, dude, it's super, super wild. I can't wait to get into this one.
So just to give you kind of a synopsis of this, so after World War One, the Greeks and the Turks, they go to war for about 3.5 years. During this war, there's horrible atrocities. Hundreds of thousands of people are killed. Atrocities are being committed by both sides, by the way. Most of them are civilians, and it's characterized by race riots, lynchings, mob violence. There's purges of entire ethnic enclaves. It's really really ugly. So, and going back to that, you have this very bad situation with the Ottomans falling apart, with different ethnic groups colliding. The solution, and this is the solution from the world community, is to remove the populations away from each other, to separate Greeks and Turks. So after the Greco-Turkish War ends in 1922, as part of the peace, Greece and Turkey agreed to swap populations. So in total, 1.5 million people, so 1.5 million people
Hmm.
were forced to leave their countries.
Yep.
And this was an exchange. It was about 1.2 million Greek Orthodox Christians. They were expelled from Turkey. And roughly, the number is roughly 350,000 Muslims were expelled from Greece.
Right.
And let's just be clear, this was not a voluntary migration. This was
Yep.
a state enforced expulsion that was endorsed by both states, by both countries, and the international community.
Hmm.
So it wasn't like a random, like, oh, these people were expelled from their homes from mobs. Like it was, I mean, that was happening at the time, but the remedy of the ethnic violence was just to remove the people from each other's states.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I'll go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, the Greeks that were living in Asia Minor were an ancient peoples, and they had been there. Asia Minor being, the Turkish area where we call Turkey right now, but they had been there since the 8th, 7th century BCE. And I mean, the Persian War started because the Greek colonies there rose up in rebellion against the Persians. Also, Muslims had been living in Greece and in the Balkans for generations as well. Maybe not quite as long as the Greeks in Anatolia, but they were established there. So both of these groups who had firm roots, where they were living, were basically just told to pack up and leave the only homes that they've ever known, potentially for generations. And both of those cultures are intergenerational families living in the same household. So you can imagine how hard that must have been. And again, this wasn't just some rogue like ethnic cleansing program or a pogrom. It was literally state sanctioned and legally codified. And again, as you said, Henry, had international support. Like the governments of Greece and Turkey sat down and they signed an agreement, and it was like an NBA trade deal or something, except the result of it was like forced expulsion of populations, which is wild.
Yeah, it was like it was like, we'll trade you our Greeks for your Turks, or for your, I mean, they spoke of it in, kind of a sectarian way.
Mhm.
So Christians for Muslims type of thing.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
the funniest part, and it's not funny, but again, this was seen as like a very practical idea by global leaders. Like, of course, this was what you're supposed to do, and that
Oh,
was,
you Muslims and you Christians don't like each other? How about you just get all the Christians out of this country and you put them over there? And then you take all the Muslims out of this country and you put them over there. Everybody's happy.
I mean, it was
Stupid.
it was endorsed by the League of Nations, and given kind of the mandate of the League of Nations, and
Well, that's why the
what
League
had
of Nations
happened.
doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
given the mandate, and that is kind of what you would expect him to think, given a lot of the principles behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine if something like that had happened now? Like two countries just deciding to unilaterally ethnic cleanse, or actually bilaterally, not unilaterally, to bilaterally ethnically cleanse each other's populations under the guise of like an exchange. It'd be like an international outrage. But back then people were like, oh yeah, that's how you solve a conflict. Like, can you imagine like what if the U.S. and Mexico? I mean, we're having like a little bit of a, a trade war or a population issue in the southern border right now. Imagine if Mexico decides to kick out all the gringos, and we kick out all of the Mexicans, and we just do a forced population swap. And I don't mean like the illegal aliens either, right? I mean like literally everyone who's just happens to be part of that other ethnic group, that have been living there forever or for a day, and just swap them. How do you think that's going to work out?
I mean, it wouldn't work out well. There obviously wouldn't be too much political will for that, and I don't think that the Hispanic population would want to be shipped back. Obviously, that's the reason for the protest.
I mean, like
but
shipping
yeah.
back at that point, right? Like most of these people, in the Greco-Turkish population swap, had been living in those respective areas forever, right? Like, like they've just been. That's where they live.
Yeah,
That's their home.
In the case of the Greek population there, the history goes back thousands of years. In the case of the Muslim population there, probably a couple of centuries, a century, 100, 200 years.
200 years. I mean,
long
it's no
enough,
small amount of time. Yeah.
Long enough for, my take is that if your grandparents were born there, you're kind of like sewn to the land at that point.
Yeah.
But just to go back, and we should probably go back and provide the historical context.
Sure. Yeah.
It's in one of these huge topics like this, it's hard to know where to start. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the Greek language goes back 5,000 years. Mm-hmm. And if you go back to ancient times, like you said this earlier, Greeks were setting up colonies all over the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, as early as the 8th century. So there had always been Greek city-states in Asia Minor. Mm-hmm. And you said it before, the Persian Wars started out because the Greeks in Anatolia, they were rebelling against the Persian Empire, and Athens and Sparta and the Greek city-states came to their support. Mm-hmm. So they were a settler, trading society that had established city-states and civilization everywhere. And then, of course, like the conquest of Alexander the Great, they further, he was Macedonian, but he further Hellenized Anatolia. Yep. And by the 2nd century BCE, Rome had absorbed these Hellenized cities. And Greek was spoken in a large part of the Roman Empire. It was the primary language of the Eastern Roman Empire after the split in 395. And Orthodox Christianity was Eastern Rome's primary religion. The significance really here, though, when it comes to Christianity is really important here, because Anatolia is where Christianity really develops into like a true organized religion. It's where Apostle Paul did his first major missionary work. It's where a lot of the early church fathers come from. It's where they were, originally preaching. So these were people that, used Greek philosophy to articulate Christian theology, regarding the nature of God and the Trinity and the soul.
Yeah, I mean,
so there's this really deep. These are ancient Christians.
Yeah. I mean, the Bible is literally written in Greek, so it becomes the main part of the Byzantine Empire, and with Greek speakers forming like a substantially significant portion of the population, we can skip ahead, and the Seljuk Turks, they start moving into Anatolia in about the 11th century, which leads to like the gradual Turkification of central Anatolia. And, many Greek communities remain there, especially in Western coastal cities and in regions like Pontus and Smyrna. Now, in the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire, they conquered Constantinople, and they expanded across Anatolia and ultimately into the Balkans. Whole story around that. And after they conquered somewhere, they would basically categorize the people based on the religion rather than on their ethnicity, right? So Greek Orthodox Christians were part of the Rum millet, meaning the people of the Roman Empire, and they were considered a distinct group, and they were granted relative autonomy under the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate. This system basically allowed Greek communities to maintain things like their language, their religion, and some degree of self-governance, which led to Greek communities thriving in urban centers like Smyrna and Constantinople and Trebizond. And meanwhile, Muslim Turks are settling in Greek lands and building mosques, and some Greeks convert into Islam, and most of them do it to avoid taxes or gain political favor, but nevertheless they're converting. So it's a lot of exchanging happening during the Ottoman Empire specifically.
Yeah, and it's important to note that Greeks weren't seen or did not see themselves at the time as members of a nation state or
nations really didn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah, this was kind of before the Spring of Nations and all of that. Nationalism didn't really take root yet. I mean, obviously there's local identities that people have, but like the whole concept of there being like some continuous Greek nation wasn't firmly like an idea yet. So ideas, identity was tied to the locale.
Right.
You, of course, had some proto-nationalist sentiment, though.
Right.
Take the ancient Greeks, for example. They saw themselves as Hellenes with a shared culture and language, but there's still city-states that hate each other's guts. I mean, Sparta, like, look what Sparta did. Sparta committed like the ultimate betrayal when they sided with the Persians over Athens.
You mean they didn't stand against the Persians at the hot gates of Thermopylae?
Well, in the first Persian War, they did, but they later turned on Athens.
Yep.
And they sided with the Persians.
Yeah.
But in those times, people often didn't really collectivize. They didn't collectivize over like a shared ethnos or language, because people could be very different in terms of their local dialects. So a Greek nation was still, not completely imagined. Meaning like this, I mean, it existed, but like, if you go to, modern day, like if you just go to any, like Italy, for example, if you go around Italy, like they speak different dialects of Italian. Like my wife speaks like a little bit of Italian. She can't really understand Sicilians when they speak Italian. So those local dialects still exist. When people did collectivize, it was under the banner of religion, whether that be Catholics versus Protestants or Christians versus Muslims. For example,
Orthodox versus Catholics. Yeah.
Yeah. So it usually was beyond on sectarian lines. For example, like the Reconquista in Spain to take back the Iberian Peninsula, that was under a Catholic banner.
Right.
When the Austrians were fighting the Ottomans, it was under a Catholic banner. So it's not nationalism. It's but it is like a tribal thing, but that's just mixed with religion. But Greeks is part of the Ottoman millet system. So like you said it before, like the Ottomans, when they conquered a place, they divided it into millets, and that was essentially identity, religious identity, not a national one. So you're a Christian, or you're an Orthodox, or you're a Christian under the Orthodox Patriarch. you're a Jew, you're whatever your religion is, you're a Muslim, and that's how they divide the different classes.
Right. When do you think the Greeks start to see themselves as like a Greek in the modern sense?
So that develops, in like the nation sense, like the way that we see it today. And again, like
Mhm.
I'm not trying to undercut or like make some like argument like, oh, like local identities and ancestry didn't exist. Like we were all different. What I'm talking
Mhm.
about is like the concept of modern nation states.
Right.
Like we live as a singular Greek nation. Like that's what I'm talking about right now. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to undercut like someone's ethnic heritage, and of course
Sure.
like your language goes back many years, and there was very unique cultures. I'm talking about in terms of nation states, like nationalism, like a collective state based off the ethnos. That modern idea emerges really after in the 1800s. The several factors made Greek receptive to the logic of nationalism. This spreads after the French Revolution, really. But first, like the Greek-speaking population was spread out, and they were deeply networked. So there were Greek merchants everywhere. There were Greek people who lived in a lot of different countries in the Mediterranean, in the Russian Empire, and along with his diaspora communities, and these diaspora communities in Western Europe and Russia, they would often be the first people exposed to this type of like discourse of nationhood. The other thing that made them very receptive to, nationalist thought is very obvious, and it's if you know Greek history, the Greeks could point to a classical heritage that was already globally recognized and symbolically powerful.
Yeah.
So in the context of a Europe redefining itself through national categories, this became political capital.
Yep.
If Italians could claim Rome, then Greeks could obviously claim Athens and Sparta.
Right.
And not just as like a history, but as, more importantly, they could claim this as inheritance.
Right.
So in the case of Greece, it really became, you couldn't be a subject if you're a Greek, right? And that's when Greek intellectuals and Greek nationalists started saying, hey, wait a minute. We're not just Orthodox Christians. We're Greeks.
Right.
It's not just that, it's not, we don't want to be free because we want to vote. We want our own state because we're the descendants of Leonidas. Like we're the descendants of yeah. So,
Odysseus, if he was a real person.
Yeah. So the average peasant might not have read Rousseau, but they know that their ancestors fought the Persians at Thermopylae, and now it's their turn to fight the Turks.
Mm-hmm. And therein lies the the hard relationship. When did this kind of cultural exchange, become violent between the Greeks and the Turks, do you think?
So, I mean, it was like a 400-year stretch of subjugation before
Yeah.
it explodes into full-scale violence. The Ottomans, they take Constantinople in 1453, and the Ottoman, I've never done too much research into like the Byzantine Empire or like the fall of Constantinople or that part of history. So I don't know too much, but like I've read like high level stuff, and allegedly it was a very, very ugly sacking of a city. Like they went in there and they killed a lot of people, and they destroyed a lot of like classical buildings, according to legend. Again, like I'm not an expert on it, so maybe that's exaggerated, or maybe it was worse than
Something for us to look into for another episode, maybe.
But I mean, that's what they thought at the very least.
Yeah,
it was a brutal sacking of a city. And by the 15th century, the Ottomans take complete control of Greece. Now, there's not peace between those years. There's local uprisings and those types of things, but like, they're disorganized and they're crushed. the Ottomans ruled over a multi-ethnic empire. Their empire included Greeks and Armenians and Serbs and Bulgarians and Kurds and Arabs and Albanians. There's a lot of people that they had dominion over. And, that system works when the state is strong enough to suppress separatism. But once that state is in decline, those suppressed identities start to wake up. And you also have European powers, primarily the Russians and the British. But, at this point in time, it's primarily the Russians who are fanning the flames of these independence movements,
Yeah.
for their own interest.